And the year begins with the first French round. Here we see the opposing forces in Germany. Napoleon has 11 strength points. Bernadotte has 5. Brunswick and Kutuzov each have 10 strength points. So the coalition has 20 strength points, while the French have a total of 16. The French, of course, are banking on superior leadership of Napoleon and his subordinate leaders, and Napoleon has the first move. So Napoleon is activated with a 1-point activation round, and he has a movement allowance of 3 because the Bavarians are part of his Grande Armée. So he will force march 3 additional movement factors for a total movement factor allowance of 6. He spends his first movement factor to enter Hanover and picks up Bernadotte's force. And now Bernadotte's force is incorporated to the Grande Armée. However, the Grande Armée now has 4 subordinate leaders. It can have only a maximum of 3, so Bernadotte will be placed in the French reserve. And the total strength of the Grande Armée is now 16 combat factors. Napoleon now spends his second movement factor to enter into the zone around Magdeburg, and spends the third to declare a siege attack on the fortress. There is a +4 modifier because of Napoleon's tactical rating and the fact that he's commanding an army. So we roll 1 die, and the result is a 2 + 4, 6. And that is honors. So the fortress surrenders. The fortress of Magdeburg surrenders. We place a destroyed fortress marker. Napoleon now decides to use one of his mobile supply units for the purpose of activating the fortress so that it serves as a supply conduit for his army. And now Napoleon spends a 4th movement point to enter the zone around Berlin and attack Brunswick. Now Kutuzov announces that he will attempt to intercept the French and join with the Prussians. Kutuzov needs a 5 or more, and as stated before, there are no positive modifiers that he can avail himself with. But first he has to play a card with a value equal to or greater than the initiative that he has, which is 2. So the coalition will play this card, Spanish galleons, to allow Kutuzov to make the interception attempt, and the card is placed in the discard pile. Now we roll 1 die for the interception attempt, and the result is a 1, and the interception attempt fails. Having failed to intercept the French Grande Armée, now Napoleon battles it out with Brunswick. And before we resolve the battle, we determine if Napoleon loses any strength as a result of his force march. As a result of the force march, Napoleon loses 2 combat factors. The first loss has to come from a French corps, so the 13th French Corps will be reduced. And the second 1 strength point loss will be from the Bavarian Corps, which is already reduced. So this Bavarian unit is gone. And it is placed in the French reserve. And now on to the battle. Napoleon has 14 combat factors, Brunswick 10, and this is a major battle. Total modifiers for the French is +7 between Napoleon's leadership as well as Davout's cavalry superiority and the elite corps unit, which is selected to lead the assault. On the Prussian side, the total modifier is just a +1 because of the First Corps' elite status. The French roll a 7 modified to a 14, while the Prussians roll a 6 modified to a 7. The Prussians lose 6 strength points, while the French lose 3. So the winner of this battle is clearly Napoleon. So the Prussians suffer 6 step losses. And the French, starting with the 5th Corps, suffer 3 step losses. Because of the Prussian losses and the tactical rating of the commander, no die roll is necessary. The Prussians are demoralized. In the ensuing cavalry pursuit, the Prussians lose 6 additional steps, and this destroys the remainder of the Prussian army. Napoleon scores an overwhelming victory, and Davout, his subordinate, does not suffer any wounds in the combat. We've seen that Napoleon conquered the fortress of Magdeburg. We forgot to put the control marker there, and has destroyed the Prussian army in the zone around Berlin. Kutuzov, not wanting a repeat of what happened to the Prussian army, will attempt to evade Napoleon. So he needs a roll of 5 or 6. So we roll 1d6, and the roll is a 3. Kutuzov's army fails to evade Napoleon. And now we have another battle in this activation by Napoleon. Napoleon has 11 combat factors and the Russians 10. So this is a minor battle. If there would have been one more combat factor, it would have been a major battle. Let's check the modifiers for each of the sides. The French, with Napoleon's leadership plus that of Davout, Murat as a cavalry commander plus cavalry superiority and committing the Imperial Guard, have a +8. The Russians, with Kutuzov's leadership and the elite 2nd Corps as lead unit, have only a +3. The French now decide if they will use a combat card, and they will play this card, Cuirassier's Charge. And this provides a combat bonus of +1 or +2 if a cavalry general is present. This will be a +2 because Murat is a cavalry general. So that increases the modifier for this attack for the French from 8 to +10. On the other hand, the coalition has this combat card, Mass Charge, which they will use, which provides a bonus of +1 if a reserve cavalry corps is present in the army, and the Russians have one here. So that increases the Russian die roll modifier from +3 to +4. And now we roll the dice, and it is obvious that the Russians need to beat the French die roll by a substantial margin. So we roll the dice for the French first. The French roll an 8 modified to an 18. The largest die result is actually a 16. So that causes losses of 4 combat factors on the Russians, and 1 at least has to be a cavalry combat factor. Now we roll for the Russians. The Russians roll a 9 modified to a 13, and that causes losses of 3 combat factors on the French. So the French are the victors of this battle. We remove the losses for both sides. Davout was not wounded as a result of combat, and now we check to see if the Russians are demoralized. Because the coalition played the combat card, the total modifiers for the Russian army prevent it from being demoralized. So the Russians pass the test, and there will be no cavalry pursuit by the French. So the Russians retreat from the field. Kutuzov decides to retreat into West Prussia, which has the friendly fortress of Danzig and is in proximity to Benningsen's force. Napoleon, having defeated the Russians in the space surrounding Kustring, now has a free siege attack against that enemy fortress. Napoleon rolls a 6, and with modifiers, he captures the fortress of Custrin. And now Napoleon decides to spend his second mobile supply unit to convert the fortress to friendly use and for it to serve as a conduit of supply. And a control marker is placed on the zone. And this ends Napoleon's activation. We go to the first round for the coalition, and they will play the Holy Russia card for its activation value of 2. And the card is set aside and will return in the next turn. Both activation points are used to activate Bennigsen's force, which will move from its location here in the zone surrounding Königsberg to West Prussia, and Bennigsen's force will be absorbed by Kutuzov's army. And now Kutuzov's army increases now to 8 combat factors, and more importantly, Bennigsen, as a subordinate leader, will add 1 tactical point in defense. The French decide not to play any cards, but to conduct a 1 activation point round, and the French activate Napoleon's Grande Armée. The Grande Armée will force march 1 extra zone. Its current speed or movement rating is 4 because all of its component units are French. So with the extra zone gained by force marching, the Grande Armée will have a movement allowance for this round of 5 movement points. The first movement point is spent to enter the zone of West Prussia, for the purpose of entering into battle with Kutuzov's army. Kutuzov, however, decides to attempt to evade Napoleon. To succeed, Kutuzov must roll a 5 or higher. He does not have any modifiers such as cavalry superiority or an initiative value lower than the active general, which is Napoleon. And nor did Napoleon enter a difficult terrain zone. So he needs a 5 or 6, and a die is rolled. The result is a 5, and Kutuzov successfully evades by retreating east 1 zone. Napoleon must decide now to spend 1 movement point either to attack Kutuzov or now to attack the fortress of Danzig. By converting the fortress of Danzig, Napoleon, after defeating Kutuzov, could move south and take Thorn and would maintain a supply connection with Danzig and through Custrin back to France. So Napoleon decides to lay siege on Danzig, and that's how he spends his second movement point. Napoleon lays siege on Danzig, and he will attack with a differential or modifier of +4. That is +3 for his offensive tactical value and +1 because he is commanding an army and the army has an inherent engineer corps. He needs a modified die roll of 6 or more for the fortress to surrender, but he has a +4. So he rolls 1d6. The roll is a 5 modified to a 9 breach, and the fortress surrenders. If there would have been any troops inside the fortress, they would have been destroyed. The fortress is considered destroyed, but Napoleon has an interest of activating this fortress as soon as possible so that it serves as a supply conduit when he moves south against Warsaw. The Grande Armée has no mobile supply units left, so it must reduce one of its units by 1 in order to activate the fortress of Danzig. So the 7th Corps is eliminated, and this reduces the Grande Armée to a total of 7 combat factors. But the fortress of Danzig is now activated and serves as a French supply conduit. Napoleon now spends his 3rd movement point to move into Kutuzov's zone, crossing the bridge between both zones. Kutuzov announces that he will attempt to evade. He needs a 5 or 6. This time the roll is a 3, and he will not be able to get out of Napoleon's way. But before commencing the battle, we roll for attrition as a result of Napoleon's forced march. Modifiers are +1 because 1 movement point was gained by forced marching, +2 because the Grande Armée entered into a poor zone, and that leads us to +3, but -2 because the entirety of the forced march is being conducted by French troops. So that is a total of +1. We roll 1d6, and the die roll is a 3 modified to a 4. We have an asterisk. We roll the die again, and the force will lose 1 step on a die roll of 4 to 6. So the die is rolled one more time. The result is a 2, so the Grande Armée loses no strength as a result of the force march. And now, on to the battle. The French have 7 combat factors, the Russians 8, so this is a minor battle. Let's take a look at the French modifiers. Let's see what the French modifiers are. +3 for Napoleon's offensive tactical value, +2 for Davout's offensive tactical value as a subordinate, that is +5. The French have cavalry superiority, so the modifier goes up to +6. And the Guard, the Imperial Guard unit, is designated as lead unit, and it has double elite status, so that adds +2. So the total modifier for the French is +8. The Russians start with a +2, that is Kutuzov's defensive tactical value. The defensive tactical value of a subordinate, in this case Benningsen, that adds a +1, so we are at +3. And the Russians will designate the 1st Corps as their lead unit. It has a 1-star elite status, and that adds an additional +1 for a total of +4. The French announce that they will play this card, Horse Artillery, for its event as a combat card, and this card will add an additional +1 to the French die roll modifier, increasing it to +9. The coalition has no combat cards that are playable at this time. So the French roll 2d6. The roll is an 8 modified to a 17. The highest result on the battle table is a 16. So the Russians suffer a loss of 4 combat factors, one of which has to be of cavalry. The Russians roll a 7 modified to an 11. And they cause losses of 2 steps on the French army. Now we subtract the losses. The Imperial Guard was a lead unit, so it loses 1 step, and it is now eliminated. And the 2nd step is taken from the 5th Corps, which is also reduced, and it is also eliminated. And now the Russians must remove 4 strength factors, including one of cavalry. The first loss comes from the lead corps, the 1st Corps, which is now eliminated. The 2nd and 3rd loss will come from the 2nd and 4th Corps, which are already reduced and are now eliminated. And finally, the 4th step loss comes from the reduced reserve cavalry, which is now eliminated. Having lost the battle, now we determine if Kutuzov's army is demoralized, and it will be demoralized on a roll of 5 or 6. The roll is a 5, and the first Russian army is demoralized. And now the Grande Armée can conduct a cavalry pursuit. And now to the pursuit die roll. The modifiers are +3 for Napoleon's tactical rating, +1 for each step of reserve cavalry. We have 2 steps, so we're at +5, and +1 because there is a cavalry leader in Murat. So that is a total modifier of +6. We roll 1d6, and we subtract 6 from the total, and that will be the amount of extra losses the Russians will have to suffer. So we roll 1d6. The result is a 4 modified to a 10. We subtract 6, and the Russians suffer 4 more steps of losses as a result of the cavalry pursuit. And 4 steps is what is left in the Russian First Army. So all the combat forces are eliminated, and the army, as well as the leaders, are also eliminated and go into the reserve. And the Grande Armée has won a crushing victory, and Davout is not wounded in the battle. Napoleon defeats and destroys Kutuzov's army. It still has 4 movement points left. It now spends its 4th movement point to enter the zone around Thorn, and a 5th movement point to attack the fortress. So Napoleon attacks the fortress. His modifiers are +3 for his offensive tactical value and +1 because he commands an army. For a total modifier of +4, he rolls 1d6. The result is a 1 modified to a 5, stable. There is no effect, and the siege continues. Napoleon now uses his 6th movement point to attack the fortress once again. Now the duration of the siege marker is flipped to its +1 side, and now the modifiers are +3 for Napoleon's tactical rating, +1 because he commands an army, and an additional +1 because of the siege duration marker, for a total of +5. The die roll is a 3 modified to an 8 breach, and the fortress surrenders. The fortress is considered destroyed, and Napoleon now has to make a big decision. He needs this fortress for supply purposes so that he can continue on to Warsaw and be able to attack in a supplied state. His Grande Armée is down to 5 strength factors, so he expends one of his reduced corps, that is the 4th Corps, which is now eliminated, in order to activate the fortress of Thorn as a supply conduit. And that will allow Napoleon to move against Warsaw and attack in a supplied manner. Having his army in a very weakened state, and with 1 movement factor left, Napoleon decides to end his activation for now. Napoleon is about to take Warsaw. The Russians have scattered forces in St. Petersburg, Moscow, and to the south in Odessa. It will take them some time to be able to present any obstacle or challenge to Napoleon's Grande Armée, which is decimated and down to 5 combat factors. Having suffered a disaster in Germany, the coalition now wants to create a diversion for Napoleon. And they decide then to use their navy to transport British troops onto the Iberian Peninsula. For that purpose, the coalition plays the British permanent card for its event. And this allows the activation of all British and minor Allied fleets with naval transport, including 1 amphibious assault. And the permanent card is placed aside and will return to the coalition's hand in the next turn. This British fleet in London is activated for the purpose of transporting more, the 1st Corps, and a mobile supply unit from the port of London, and the fleet moves to the English Channel on a southwesterly course into the North Atlantic, the Gulf of Gascony, the South Atlantic Zone, finally reaching the port of Lisbon. Upon arriving at the port of Lisbon, Moore's force joins with the Portuguese corps. The coalition activates Nelson's fleet together with Saumarez's fleet to attack the French and Spanish fleets anchored in Cadiz. Here Nelson and Saumarez are attacking Villeneuve and Gavina's fleets. The British announced that they will use this card, the weather gauge, as a combat card, and this card adds 3 in naval combat in the first round of this naval battle. Because this is an attack on a port, only 1 round of combat takes place. Each of the fleets rolls a die, and we modify the die roll by the modifier printed on the fleet counter. In addition, the port also rolls a die. Villeneuve rolls a 2 modified to a 3, and Gravina a 3 modified to a 4. The roll for the port is a 3, so the total die roll plus modifiers for the French/Spanish side is 10. On the British side, Nelson rolls a 4 modified to a 7, and Saumarez rolls a 5, which is not modified. And to that we add the bonus for the weather gauge of +3. For a total die roll of 15 for the British. When we compare it to the total for the French and Spanish of 10, there is a difference of +5 for the British side. Because the differential is 5, the loser, in this case the French and Spanish, lose a fleet and the survivors retreat. The French decide to lose the Spanish fleet, so the Spanish fleet is destroyed. And the surviving French fleet retreats into the port. And the blockade of the port of Cadiz continues, but this time the French have 1 less fleet to defend with. And the weather gauge card goes into the discard pile. The French now play this card for its event, and this is a foreign war card. Because the British do not control Algiers or Tunis, they have to send a fleet to the foreign wars box. The British can pick a British or minor allied fleet, so they decide to send the Portuguese fleet to the foreign wars box. Because this card was played for its event and it has a yellow star, it is removed permanently from the game. Coalition third round, and they play this card, Harem, for its activation value of 3. For the purpose of activating Wittgenstein's force in St. Petersburg and the 10th Corps in Moscow, so that they join and move towards East Prussia. Both forces move and converge upon Novgorod, where both join. And the Harem card goes to the discard pile. We move now to the 4th French round, last round of good weather in this turn. The French have these cards left, 3 3-point cards and a 2-point card. And the French have a pressing need to reach Warsaw soon before bad weather and winter sets in. So they will not play any cards, but will conduct a 1 activation point round to activate Napoleon's Grande Armée. The Grande Armée is activated. It will not conduct any forced marches. It spends 2 movement points to cross the bridge into Poznan, and from there to enter the zone surrounding Warsaw to attack the Prussian 5th Corps. Because the Grande Armée has 5 combat factors, it has a 5-to-1 combat odds ratio advantage over the Prussians, and that's all it takes for the Prussians to be eliminated without having to conduct an actual battle. So Napoleon now controls the zone surrounding Warsaw. Napoleon now spends his third movement point to lay siege on the fortress of Warsaw. Because he has a tactical value of 3 and an engineer corps in his army, he has a total modifier of +4, so he only needs 2 or more for the fortress to surrender. The roll is a 6, the result is a breach, the fortress is destroyed and surrenders. Napoleon could conceivably spend one of his combat factors to immediately activate the fortress, but he has no need to do so. He can draw supply, 2 movement points to Thorn, and from there to other connected fortresses back to France. So he will not expend any of his troops in activating the fortress. Fourth coalition round, last round of clear weather. The coalition plays Drums of War for its activation value of 2. And Wittgenstein's force, which is 4 combat factors strong, is activated. It will not force march, it will move. It's a full movement allowance of 3. For the purpose of reaching the area surrounding the fortress of Memel. And the Drums of War card goes into the discard pile. French 5th round, and this is a bad weather round, so all forces move with 1 less movement factor. Napoleon, with 5 strength points, has captured Warsaw. The Russians only have 4 strength points. They're here in Memel. They're not strong enough to recover the lost ground, so the conquest of Prussia is a sure thing. That will give Napoleon, during the interface, the opportunity to create the Duchy of Warsaw, and that will add forces, Polish forces, to the French cause. Now, here we have the army of Italy under Massena with a total of 5 combat factors. He could conceivably move in a northwesterly direction to reinforce Napoleon. The problem is that during the next turn, 1807, Austria may come back into the war against the French, so Massena will stay put there. In Tuscany, we have Lannes' force, which is ready to move south and take on the Neapolitans. The problem is that the Papal States are in between, and these are allied to Austria. And since no war was declared on Austria this turn, the French cannot enter the Papal States. But in the next turn, if Austria enters the war, Lannes may move south to battle the Neapolitans. The French need one more zone with the letter R here to control in order to create the Confederation of the Rhine. Massena could probably or conceivably force march his way north and capture Kassel to do that, but chances are, in a bad weather turn like this, that the attrition as a result of the force march will make him lose 1 strength point, something the French do not want to happen in front of this Austrian army that may enter the war in the next turn and which looks pretty substantial. So the French will conduct a 1 activation point round to activate the reduced Württemberg Corps for the purpose of moving east and join Massena's army. And the Württemberg Corps moves, entering the zone around Bavaria and forming part now of Massena's army, which now has 6 combat factors. 5th coalition round, a bad weather round. We have here in Lisbon more British Corps and a Portuguese Corps, 4 combat factors. More could move north and attack Blake or move east and attack Castaños. However, it is very likely that in the next round, the coalition may be able to ignite the Spanish rebellion against the French. and that will bring Spain into the war on the coalition's side. So for now, the best course of action for the coalition is to make sure that the Portuguese capital is safe, and no action will be taken in this round. Therefore, the coalition also passes. Sixth French round, a winter round, not a good round for moving around and force marching. Napoleon stays put in Warsaw and Massena in Munich. So the French pass in this round. Sixth and last coalition round, winter round. The coalition could activate Wittgenstein here with his 4 combat factors, but there is no positive prospect of moving him south and attacking Napoleon. That would cause a force march, which would be devastating in winter, and being through poor terrain, it would even cause more casualties. So discretion is the better part of valor now, and the Russians will stay put at Memel, and the coalition will also pass in this 6th and last round of 1806. Conquests and surrenders phase. Prussia has been conquered. Its capital was seized by the French, as well as one of the other key zones, in this case, Warsaw. So Prussia is out of the war. With Prussia now out of the war, the coalition loses the cards for Berlin and Königsberg, as well as Warsaw. And the French gain 1 extra card during the next draw card phase. The continental blockade is now imposed upon the Prussian ports of Stettin, Danzig, and Königsberg. Now France can annex to its national territory 3 zones belonging to Prussia or any of its minor allies. France will annex the 2 zones that comprise Hesse. And now, in addition to Hesse, France controls 6 minor nations that have this R symbol. And those are Hesse, Berg, the Palatinate, Baden, Württemberg, and Bavaria. So in the next turn or onwards, if the French play this card for its event, the Triumph of Erfurt, they will gain 2 victory points, and the escalade level will be increased by 2, as the Confederation of the Rhine is created as a French protectorate. But this card is not yet in the French player's hand. The French may annex 1 more zone, and that will be the zone around Magdeburg. You see that has a W, meaning that later on, with the play of a specific event card, control of provinces having a W, such as Magdeburg, and, for example, Berg, as well as Hesse and Hanover, will create the Kingdom of Westphalia, another French protectorate. But for now, we place the French national territory marker to signify that Magdeburg is now part of French soil. Note that the French did not annex Warsaw to its national territory, and it is because the French still hold this card, Marie Walewska, which allows them to create the Kingdom of Poland during the upcoming diplomacy phase of the next turn, which would be 1807. Now the French decide, as victors over Prussia, to either stay in Prussia or move their forces to the nearest frontier zone. And if the French decide to stay, they cannot use the Prussian fortresses as supply conduits. So Napoleon, who is in Warsaw, decides to deploy his army to the nearest frontier zone, which is the newly acquired zone of Magdeburg. And now we remove each of these French control markers from Prussian zones. Now we roll 1d6 and divide the result by 2 to determine the duration of the forced peace upon Prussia. So we roll 1 die. The result is a 3 divided by 2, 1.5, rounded up, and it will be out of the game for 2 turns. So that means Prussia will be out of the war for 1807 and 1808. It may return in 1809. And finally, we remove all destroyed fortress markers, the only one being in Warsaw. Here in the victory phase, now we perform the adjustments. We had forgotten to reflect that Prussia, a major power that was neutral, joined the coalition, and that is an event that raises the escalade level by 1, so we will make that adjustment now. Now, Prussia has been conquered, and that also raises the escalade level by 1 and gives the French another victory point, raising its total now to 7. And that is the end of the 1806 turn, and now in the game we would move to 1807. And with this video we end our playthrough/tutorial of Napoleon Against Europe. I hope this video gives you a good idea of how the game plays and what the game has to offer. Thanks for watching.